I'm putting my career in jeopardy by telling you this story, but you deserve to know. Your brain is in danger. I work in advertising. I'm part of a team that tries to maximize the effectiveness of our messages. You know, to make our commercials and print ads work better. My job typically involves brainstorming with a group of brilliant marketers, business executives, psychologists, and lately, computer scientists, in order to sell the average Joe a bunch of stuff he doesn't need. But we'll come back to that. On the first day of this month, my boss was in my office. Ed was a short, squat, and sweaty man who often took the role of boss literally by bossing his underlings around. He had just coerced one of the women on this floor of the building, who was definitely not a coffee intern, to make and deliver 2 mugs of coffee, one for himself and one for me. He was aggressively blowing on his mug while he pondered what I had just told him. Eventually, he set it down next to the coaster on my desk and spoke. "Completely unproductive, you say?" He took a tone that was both skeptical and condescending. "Young man, it isn't your job to decide whether the machines are being productive. Your job is to tell me how the customers are engaging with the new advertisements. For God's sakes, do you know how much money we've put into this project?" He waved his hands around dramatically, gesturing at nothing in particular, and conveniently ignoring my irate face when he referred to me as young man. As if my degrees meant nothing next to his position on the corporate ladder that looked down the hierarchical corporate branches like tunnels in a termite mound. I took a deep breath and then tried to explain it to him again. "And I'm telling you, Ed, all of that money is being wasted on something that isn't working and will never work. The remaining computer science team doesn't have the balls to tell you that it's hopeless because they like the job. And as for the customers, I've already shown you their opinions." I gestured at the yellow folders sitting in front of him containing the opinion summaries, which he had barely flipped through. It wouldn't surprise me if he had no idea what a median response even was. "So the customers don't like the ads yet? Why not just give it more time? Isn't that the point of machine learning? To improve a little bit here and there until it's perfect?" he grumped. The program I was desperately trying to axe was one of the babies of the technology arm of our company. Other companies were trying artificial intelligence solutions, so why not us? Did we want to fall behind, young man? He was disappointed that I was telling him that our machines were turning out to be a bunch of junk. What he didn't know was that I was lying. My background is in psychology, but when the time came to choose between teaching college-level introduction to psychology courses for almost no money or jumping ship from academia to industry for what was comparatively all of the money, the choice was clear to me. After bouncing around between a few firms for a while, I ended up with a cushy 6-figure salaried position at a large company that you have almost certainly heard of. The products we make include a great many different things, but this particular tale is about a caffeinated beverage. People are ridiculous. That's something you can't avoid learning if you get a degree in psychology. But this ridiculousness is even more prevalent when it comes to the beverage industry in America. People make a big deal out of the money that we spend on alcohol, but the much more interesting sector to me is that of another drug, caffeine. You might not think of caffeine as a drug, but trust me, as a psychologist, I can tell you that caffeine is a psychoactive drug that changes the functioning of your brain. Specifically, caffeine is a type of stimulant. More specifically, it's in a category of drugs called xanthines. Xanthines are naturally found in plants, like coffee beans and tea leaves. By the way, the reason that these plants make xanthines in the first place is to serve as natural pesticide. If an insect eats enough caffeine, it will become overstimulated, and then it will die. People, on the other hand, don't regularly overdose on caffeine. But believe it or not, it can happen. People all over the world spend a ridiculous amount of money on caffeinated beverages. Coffee and tea are probably the most well known, but don't forget about energy drinks, soda, and anything containing chocolate, which has only small amounts of caffeine, but still. And the hottest thing in the caffeinated industry right now is ready-to-drink, RTD, coffee and tea. Canned, bottled, and even boxed. These coffees and teas of every color and flavor are taking supermarket aisles by storm. It's expensive, but the targeted millennial and zoomer markets don't seem to mind. In the United States, the RTD coffee market has grown enormously every year since at least 2015. An influential research firm predicted that by the year 2024, the global ready-to-drink market will be worth over $116 billion. My job is to make these addicts spend even more. I'm not going to tell you the real name of the particular beverage branding that I was working on. That's more than you need to know. But the caffeinated detail is important, as you'll understand later. I'm going to have to fuddle up the rest of the details, like names, in order to protect myself. But my goal here is to tell you things that are true, because I'm afraid that nobody else will. Up until recently, my actual job involved a lot of numbers and a lot of videos. I handled each respectively on one of my two computer monitors, balanced like conjoined twins on my desk, that was also overflowing with printed pages from marketing journals. As a consequence of the IT department being run by absolute lunatics, one of my computer monitors was slightly bigger than the other, and to compensate, it was currently perched on top of a paperback copy of The Metamorphosis of Prime Intellect, which was a novel that Mike gifted to me when I joined the project. You'll meet him in a bit. The numbers of my job were complex analyses called engagement reports that looked into who was watching our ads and how the ads were affecting those viewers. The videos were advertisements for various products. They included our own and our competitors. I would watch the videos and analyze surveys given to our customers about those videos and their purchasing habits. The goal was to find information that would help our company produce an ad that could become a viral video that would also translate into sales. That's what we call actionable insights, when we notice a trend in the data that we can use in our ads. It was easier said than done. In psychology speak, the attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors of the viewers were not well correlated. Just because someone liked our ad didn't mean that they would buy our product. My solution was to design surveys in multiple parts that measured more than a typical survey. Here is how it would work, in a nutshell. People would be hired to come to our company and watch some advertisements for our products. We called these people our focus group participants. The participants would tell us what they thought of the ads. Then our marketing team would ask about competitor brands. My role was to send follow-up emails. I would email these surveys to focus group participants, and they would respond over the course of days or weeks or months with what they were doing with our product. Were they buying it? Were they thinking about it? Here's the thing about advertisements that might surprise you. They work. When I introduce myself at gatherings and tell people what I do for a living, sometimes I get someone who insists to me that they are immune to advertisements. "Advertisements don't work on me," they will say. Well, I have news about that. Advertisements work on everybody. They work on me, they work on you, and they damn well work on people who think that they don't work. Part of the reason for this effectiveness is that the point of many advertisements is to build awareness, not to immediately sell something. The buzzword in the ad industry is engagement, which is the idea that slowly building up a positive impression of a company is an effective use of advertising. Consider insurance companies. Television ads about insurance often have very little to do with insurance, and instead focus on humor or other emotions. They don't expect the people watching to immediately purchase a protection plan, and in fact, research has shown that humor may not have much, if any, influence on immediate purchasing behaviors. Instead, they want to leave a positive impression of that company, because eventually it will become time to consider insurance plans. Funny ads have a larger impact on implicit memory, meaning that they stick around in your head for longer. Ideally, they want to get it stuck in your head forever. But that's not the whole story. Advertisements also actually do result in more sales of products, at least if they are done well. A few years ago, the Advertising Research Foundation released findings from an enormous study that investigated the effects of over 5,000 ad campaigns from around the world. Those ad campaigns represented around $375 billion in spending. And do you know what one of the top recommendations from the research was? The companies should have invested even more money. They should have invested on even more platforms. Advertising works. More recently, my job changed somewhat because of the introduction of a magic machine. Okay, it wasn't really magic. It was a neural network. Basically, a fake brain made out of computer parts that automatically got better at its job as it learned what worked and what didn't work. I had heard the term neural network tossed around quite a bit in the psychology literature over the years, but I had never had the privilege of working with one. Because it was essentially just a bunch of fancy code, we could run the neural network separately as a bunch of smaller units that we referred to as machines. Here's how it worked at a basic level. One of the machines took in a bunch of information in the form of advertisement videos and statistics about how well each advertisement performed. We would also give it things like images of the company logo and the product we wanted to advertise. Then the machine would do a bunch of calculations using neural layers, which are just a fancy way of doing some math to the pixels of a video file. It adds, subtracts, and otherwise calculates something that it considers to be the optimal advertisement. Then, here's the coolest part. The neural network produced a video. Not a script for a video, but a fully finished video. Giving machines creative control over projects exists in other spheres too, like music, where machines have been learning how to compose original scores. A neural network called Bach-prop, a pun which I am told is very funny, has recently demonstrated the ability to generate new music in any musical style after it has been fed a bunch of examples from that genre. When Bach-prop generated some classical string quartet pieces, an actual real-live string quartet of humans proceeded to play the pieces for an audience. The audience then voted for their favorite pieces, and using a complex process, if you must know, a Bayesian skill rating algorithm called TrueSkill, the original music scores were compared to the ones generated by the neural network. The music written by the machine was just as good, and in some cases ranked a bit better than the original music. According to listeners, the music was convincing, coherent, and pleasant. And if you have trouble believing that, you can listen to it online and judge for yourself. Neural networks have also been used for image generation. As one example, a program by Google called Deep Dream had neural networks produce phantasmal and haunting images to represent how they more or less thought about categories of images like birds. If you look at the images, you'll see some birdness, but also get a glimpse into just how alien these machine minds really are. Machines have also become pretty good at making faces of people that don't exist. A website called thispersondoesnotexist.com will show you a face created by a computer as many times as you refresh the page. The only hint that you might be looking at something constructed rather than captured is the background of the images, which often contain smears of color that reveal the blended nature of the image. The lesser-known thiscatdoesnotexist.com is not as polished, occasionally producing multi-limbed whiskered atrocities with big, beautiful eyes. And perhaps most worrisome for people who are concerned about using machine learning for unscrupulous purposes is the creation of deep-fake videos. Essentially, a deepfake is the ability to record movements made by one person's face and transfer those movements onto another person's face. In addition, computer-generated voices created to mimic the sound of a real person's voice can be used to complete the illusion. This results in a video of a person saying something that looks pretty convincing, but the person never actually said that thing. It's concerning especially for celebrities and politicians who could have their reputations ruined by a scandalous video. One way that is being tested to detect deep fake videos is to use machine learning again, but this time in order to spot differences in the fake videos compared to real ones. Perhaps only neural networks can save us from neural networks. Anyway, once we had the advertisement produced by the neural network, we could show it to a focus group and then give feedback to the machines. Essentially, it worked like before we had the machines. The marketing team would show the video to a group of people paid to watch the ads, then they'd ask them questions, and then I would send them follow-up surveys. Once I had follow-up data, I could summarize it and feed it back into the machine that created it. I imagined it to be a bit like training a metal dog. Good dog, people liked that ad. Bad dog, try again. Neural networks have actually been used in conjunction with advertising before, but only to make predictions. To the best of our knowledge, our project was the first time that a neural network had been used to actually create advertising. The machines weren't just working on one video at a time, mind you, they were producing all kinds of different stuff. Some of it seemed so weird that the marketing team didn't bother to show it to anybody. Other ads did get shown to people, and that's where the problems came from. Because I was a psychologist, which according to Ed was closely related to the field of human-computer interaction that the neural network team members dabbled in, I was heavily involved in the process of training the neural network. Honestly, part of it was probably that the higher-ups needed somebody who could translate what was happening from computer nerd speak into company speak. So I became the dumbest person in the room at the frequent meetings where the machines were discussed and trained and given feedback. I also attended all of the focus groups, often sitting quietly in a corner or behind a one-way mirror, like us researchers enjoy doing. It was still my job to administer the follow-up surveys, but because I had already written and perfected the surveys from previous rounds of advertising development, the work there had become minimal. My job slowly evolved from hiding in my office buried in spreadsheets of statistics, watching catchy ads peppered with pop music, to following around a bunch of quirky people trying to put together a miracle machine. The computer scientists were nice enough, if a little slow with social skills. I know that sounds stereotypical, but I think you'll agree as I tell the story. Their official team lead was a man named Benny, who had to have been over 50 years old, judging by the extra long, extra gray, and extra scratchy looking beard. If he had told me that he had invented neural networks, I would have believed him. When he was speaking directly to his team, I often couldn't even follow what was being discussed. Like when Benny mentioned backpropagation and sigmoid functions, which somehow allowed the networks to learn even faster. There was also a guy named Oscar, who was in charge of introducing entropy into the neural network. The simple way of explaining that is that he intentionally made the inputs and math inside the machines a little bit more random, on purpose. The reason that this was necessary is highly technical. I'm not even sure I grasped the whole idea. But it essentially boils down to the fact that we didn't want the resulting video file to be entirely predictable. Sometimes he would accomplish his job by introducing opera music, or space laser noises, or simply by changing the strength of some of the hidden black box math functions in the middle of the algorithm. Honestly, his job sometimes seemed like he was just messing around and seeing what happened. But isn't that true of a lot of experimental technology? The other important detail about Oscar is that he rarely ever made eye contact when speaking to someone. I'm pretty sure that 99% of the conversations I've had with him consisted of him alternating between carefully studying the walls and carefully studying the ceiling the entire time. The last member of the computer science team that frequented the meetings was Mike, who was mostly quiet and calculating behind his enormous glasses. He always had with him a giant backpack full of books and gadgets, and it was his job to do pretty much whatever Benny told him to do with the machines. I don't know much about machine learning, but I do know that sometimes it produces mystifying results. Apparently, complex machines can be mysterious to even the brightest people using them. During one of our meetings, Benny told me a story about one peculiar machine. The story is about a mysterious switch at MIT, hidden on a computer cabinet in a room full of complex machinery. The switch had two positions, which were labeled magic and more magic. According to the story, the person who discovered the switch didn't think it was capable of doing anything because it was only connected to a single wire, which meant that electric current probably wasn't running through it in any meaningful way. But out of curiosity, the person flipped the switch from more magic down to magic, and the computer suddenly crashed. Confused, they later showed the switch to another person, who also concluded that it wouldn't do anything if it was flipped. He then proceeded to crash the computer by flipping it. They came up with at least two theories as to how the switch worked, which you can read about online if you go looking for stories about magic switches. But they never really solved the mystery for certain. Today, magic and more magic switches are an inside joke among computer science enthusiasts, representing the mysterious nature that machine components can take. And from what I hear, there are machine learning examples of impenetrable mysteries too. One such example is a neural network called Deep Patient. The job of Deep Patient is to produce a diagnosis for a medical patient based on their electronic health records. For certain disorders, including diabetes, schizophrenia, and some types of cancer, the neural network produced helpful results that could be used to assist doctors with diagnoses in the future. However, the problem with Deep Patient is that the people who built it don't know how it can diagnose something as complicated as schizophrenia. Whatever data it is using to perform those calculations is well hidden in the layers of math that happen between inputting the patient data and receiving a diagnosis. We don't know how it works, which is, in a word, spooky. There were sometimes other people at those meetings with fancy jobs, but they aren't so important to this story. On rare occasions, part of the marketing team would sit in. Speaking of the marketing team, I need to introduce Karen, who is probably what you'd picture if you thought about marketing. Platinum blonde, shoulder-length hair, black business blazers and skirts, and a peppy attitude that always seemed to raise the enthusiasm level of the room. We didn't get along, which is unfortunate considering how much time we spent together on this project. I guess I'm biased. Any idiot can be in marketing. All they do is take basic psychology research and pervert it into tricks to get people to agree with them. The only hard part is the peppiness, and you have to be willing to push people around a bit. Because Karen knew that I was a psychologist, she loved to rattle on about what she thought she knew about the human mind. All of it she spoke about was just cheap gimmicks. For example, she loved to ramble about what she called the 3 yeses rule. That's not what it's actually called in marketing research. It's actually called the mere agreement effect. But you know what? Let's roll with it. The idea is simple. If you can get a person to say yes to one thing, they are increasingly likely to say yes to another thing. If you can get them to say yes to 2 things, well, boy howdy, now you can make them agree to anything with a 3rd yes. I find the easiest example of this is that of the overly friendly used car salesman. First, he asks you if you were there to look at cars, with an absurdly upbeat and friendly attitude. Yes, you say, holding back on explaining why that's a dumb question considering how you came there to meet with him in the parking lot of a car dealership. Then he asks you if you'd like some free coffee. Perhaps it's the ready-to-drink kind, just to be as hip and trendy as possible. Yes, you say, mostly just to be nice. As you take the coffee, you see a sparkle in his eye. He's cornered his prey. There's no escape. And would you like to buy a 2020 Ford Fiesta with the optional vanity plates and programmable cup holders? And before you can think, you blurt out yes, while stuffing the entire contents of your wallet into the salesman's slacks, credit cards and all. Tears stream down your face. You were going to use that money to pay for things like food. But there's no point fighting. The 3 yeses trap has been sprung. Obviously, it isn't that easy. Of course, there's some truth to getting a person to agree with you, resulting in them being more likely to continue to agree with you. Of course there is. But it isn't magic. It doesn't have a 100% success rate. Other little tricks that Karen loved to harp and titter about were the foot in the door and the door in the face techniques. Foot in the door is when you get someone to do something small, and then over time build up to a larger request. It's similar to the 3 yeses, in a way. Perhaps the best example of foot in the door was famously discussed in the classic book about persuasion called Influence by Dr. Robert Cialdini. The study first appeared as a published journal article by Friedman and Fraser from all the way back in 1966. In this example, researchers asked people to put signs in their yards to discourage people from speeding through the neighborhood. One group of people was asked to put up a little lawn sign first, and then later asked if they would be willing to put up big, ugly signs. Another group of people were just asked to put up the big signs. People who had already agreed to have the little signs in their yards were much more likely to agree to the monstrous bigger signs than those who were asked from the beginning to put up the big, ugly ones. Door in the face, on the other hand, is sort of the opposite. The premier research on this topic was led by Dr. Robert Cialdini himself. Door in the face is when you open up with some ridiculous extreme request that is so laughable that the person is guaranteed to say no. This is like hitting them in the face with a door, apparently. After that, you reduce your offer to something reasonable. The idea is that the person will mentally compare the reasonable request to the extreme request, and they will consider the reasonable request as more reasonable. In one of the experiments designed to investigate this effect, people were tricked into agreeing to become unpaid chaperones of delinquent children on a trip to the zoo for an afternoon by first making the unreasonable request for them to volunteer once a week for multiple years at a juvenile detention center. Nobody should ever be subjected to chaperoning a large group of kids at the zoo, but you might see why it would seem to have an appeal as an alternative to a bigger commitment. Anyway, Karen thought her brain was hot with the knowledge that she could manipulate our poor little customers to do whatever she wanted. She may never understand just how primitive those ideas were when compared to our robot army, but I'm getting ahead of myself. In the first weeks of the machine learning program, the computer science team would repeatedly ask me for sources of data in various forms that could be fed into their different machines running the neural network code. Do you have numbers on which age groups are mentioning the product on Twitter? Benny would ask while chewing the eraser out of a yellow number 2 pencil. Who still uses physical pencils? That guy did. Yes, that's something I can get pretty easily. Can you split it by time zone and time of day so that we can parse out when people are tweeting between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m.? He tucked the pencil, now eviscerated, back behind his ear. I didn't know what happened to the eraser, but I assumed that he had swallowed it. Benny did unspeakable things to hordes of pencils over the course of our time together. I suppose so. Why? He tutted at me with his tongue, click, click, like I was dumb for asking the question. I want to know what kind of late-night advertisements could be viable for insomniacs and third-shift workers. All kinds of weird advertisements run at night. Our final product might actually fit in pretty well there, along with the other nonsense. This pattern more or less repeated. I would tell them what numbers I had, they would discuss among themselves, and then they would give me specifics for what types of spreadsheets they wanted to see. Each of their machines started out with a different approach. The inputs were a little bit different for each machine. One used mostly data concerning how many views and watch time certain advertising videos got online. Another one used information about our product being mentioned on social media. Some of them used information as diverse as target market geography, weather, time of year trends, and popular dance search queries. I still remain mystified by some of this, but eventually the machines began producing videos. The first videos were bad. I think that the computer science team showed them to me only to make me laugh and understand how long of a shot this project was. A bunch of the ads were announcer-like voices, impressive for entirely computer-generated dialogue, listing adjectives about the product while our logo moved around on the screen. There was often blinking lights and heads of cartoon people swerving suddenly as if to look at the camera. The worst ones were kaleidoscope colors and high-pitched grinding noises overlaid atop a spinning image of the product. In retrospect, I really wish I could have seen how well these weird ads would have done if we had showed them to our focus groups. Unfortunately, those particular first batch ads won't ever see the light of day. They would have been a great addition to a shock-value postmodern pop culture art show. I assume that Andy Warhol would have exploded if he had seen these. Eventually, there were a couple of ads that were deemed by our team to be good enough for Karen to show to some guinea pigs. By which I mean people in a room in front of a projector screen. It always struck me how there were a few different kinds of people who showed up for the focus groups. Inevitably, there were a few that looked irredeemably bored, as if they were about to doze off at any moment. Those people were always offered coffee when they were filling out their first couple of forms. Then there would always be at least one person who was just thrilled to be here, guys, who probably didn't need any more caffeine in their life. For this particular project, we were using people in their early 20s. Some of them were freshly graduated from college, and others were working class. What they all had in common was that they were looking for a bit of extra money from participating in our research. Now, you might be thinking, if we pay our participants to be there, won't that cause them to lie to us and say that they really love our products when in fact they don't? And that's a great question. We try to counteract that by asking for honesty and assuring them that they will be paid no matter what their opinions are. And we also try to counteract it using my longitudinal surveys that follow up with them to see if they actually bought the product. So they would all sit and watch an advertisement, then they would silently write their thoughts, and then they'd watch another one, and then they'd silently write their thoughts and repeat until all of the ads for that session had been shown. Then the whole group would go through and talk about the ads one by one. That was the basic structure, and the first time we used the neural network generated ads was no exception. The table in the conference room was a semicircle, with the flat end running parallel to the wall on which the projection screen hung. That's where the ads were shown. Sitting around the table with small gaps in between were 16 people, each of which with a folder stuffed with papers in front of them and a coaster with a hot or cold beverage for sipping. My chair was positioned next to Karen's, behind and to the side of the focus group such that we wouldn't get in the way of their viewing. Whenever Karen gave instructions, she would stride up to the front of the room, clap her hands once, and begin a sentence with, "Okay," before explaining whatever the next step of the process was. The reason I had to be there was mostly for the ending when Karen would gesture at me and explain that I would be sending out follow-up surveys. The response rate was generally better if they could put a face to the name of the person they were receiving emails from. I actually preferred being in the room compared to sitting behind the one-way glass located to one side of the room, which to the participants looked just like a mirror. I always wondered whether I was being observed by someone else while I was in the room with the participants, but I never found out. I would try not to look at the mirror and focus on the session at hand. I remember in this particular focus group, there was a tattooed girl with bright red hair in the seat directly in front of me that kept tapping her pen on the wood of the table. However, she stopped tapping when we showed her the new computer-generated ads. She and the others were full of opinions at the end. "I love the fact that it was made by a robot, but I didn't, get it?" she offered, somewhat helpfully. The dark-eyed man next to her nodded quietly in agreement with her opinion. Someone else added, "I guess if I were to see an ad made by a computer, I would want it to be really zany, so that we could laugh at it. This was too vanilla." Overall, the focus group participants found themselves agreeing that they didn't like the ads. If I may time travel for a moment, let's get back to the morning in my office on the 1st of the month where I left you at the beginning of this story. Ed thought that this particular focus group was encouraging. "So they didn't like the ads at the beginning, so what? You heard it from them, they love the concept. We just need to keep tweaking it until we strike digital gold." "Trust me, we tweaked it," I sighed. I wasn't getting through to him. "Look, Ed, there have been many companies that have had to shut down their neural network programs because of public relations disasters. I'm not comfortable pushing the envelope until we end up like them." I was referring to examples like the hiring algorithm at Amazon that was shut down recently for being discriminatory. What happened was, at least at my level of understanding, was that the computer was given a stack of resumes to sort through in order to find top candidates for hiring. In order to teach it how to do this, the computer was given data from past hiring decisions. In other words, it could look at old resumes and then decide which of the new resumes were most likely to get someone hired. Then it would only show those resumes that it deemed promising to human eyes, and the rest were thrown out. Here's the problem. The previous hiring data included mostly men. Therefore, the computer determined that resumes containing phrases such as belonging to women's clubs were bad resumes, and it disproportionately threw them out, resulting in a recommended hiring pool consisting almost entirely of men. "Young man, we aren't hiring people. Nothing we are doing is going to get us in trouble with the law." If only he knew. I decided to try a different tactic. I'm not talking about the law, I'm talking about public relations. Based on my surveys, people feel like we are trying to mind control them, and they don't like it. It's a bad look for our company. So not only are we wasting money, but we're creating a negative image to boot. "Pah! Mind control? That's ridiculous." But from the way he held his chin, I could tell that maybe I was convincing him on some level. It would need to be enough, because there was no way I could tell him the truth about what happened next. A man with his sort of ethics shouldn't be trusted with this kind of machine. In the months of development that followed those first focus groups with the original batch of ads, the computer science team kept introducing new data to see what kind of advertising would shake out. One day, Benny made the fateful request. "Can you get us fMRI data from a few years back when they looked at all of those brains?" He was referring to a study that our company had conducted a few years previously using something called functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI. It's an expensive procedure where a person is placed inside of the type of machine that is normally used to scan brains in medical situations. But in our company's case, they had financed the study to look at the impact of advertising on the brain. Specifically, they were looking at differences in emotional processing due to brand familiarity and messaging. The results of the study were not that interesting and hadn't been published. It turns out that using fMRI in the way that they had used it was kind of pointless, and they probably should have stuck to using biometrics like heart rate, or less expensive physiological measurements like electroencephalography. Plus, then the participants could have taken selfies of themselves all wired up and looking like wise old catfish in shower caps with the electrode wires all sticking out. That would have been a better use of the funding. But still, it was a database of the reactions of dozens of people's brains to seeing advertising from our company, so perhaps it would be relevant to our experiment. What it specifically looked at was changes in blood flow during advertisements. Emotional responses could be determined by specific shifts in how the brain used oxygen, which it draws out of the blood. If you want the technical details, the region of interest of the study, and many other fMRI studies on emotion, focus on an area of the brain called the amygdala, which is associated with emotional arousal. If you're angry or excited, that's when your amygdala starts gobbling up additional oxygen. I was able to get access to those datasets and gifted them over to the computer science team to play with. Eventually, one of the neural network machines produced something extremely interesting. The computer science team was so proud of this particular ad that they held a special meeting on short notice to showcase it to me. Because it was on short notice, Karen couldn't make it there. The advertisement was funny because of how straight up unusual it was. The neural network had produced an image of some kind of pterodactyl dragon hybrid sleeping on top of a pile of drink cans, the product we were selling. There appeared to be a kaleidoscope of colors rotating around this dragon on top of its treasure hoard, and it was visibly breathing heavily, like it was snoring after an exhausting village raid. Its wings were unlike any I had seen before, truly an unusual mix of bones and lace. The visual detail that I found most interesting was the glistening orange copper sheen to the dragon's scales, shimmering as if they could fade away at any moment. It didn't seem to have any legs, and its tail was coiled around on itself, a bit like a gigantic snake. In large bubble letters above the dragon were the words, "They don't work when you don't drink them." All of that on its own was quite entertaining, but perhaps the most startling detail was the background music that lasted throughout the entire 20-second advert. The computer science team confirmed to me that it was original music made by the machine, and it was quite pleasing. It was a lullaby, but with a harmonious blend of noises that felt a bit like wind or perhaps television static. It was a soothing noise. There weren't any words, just delicate musical notes woven together like a tapestry behind the sleeping creature. I'm not sure how many times during that meeting we all played the ad and laughed and joked about it. It must have been at least 6 or 7 times. We debated whether it was something that we should show to the focus group, and in the end we agreed that the target audience would probably like it. Benny dismissed us until the next day when the regularly scheduled meeting was supposed to happen. That night, I had a dream. I saw that damn dragon with its pterodactyl wings, but it was awake. It was slowly and rhythmically swinging those unique wings, creating a gust throughout my dream. It looked like it was smiling as it gazed down at me, as if it had just won me as a loyal subject. The next morning on the way to work, I stopped at the gas station where I usually fuel up my car, and changed my routine just a bit. I went inside and bought one of the beverages that my company was selling. One of the drinks the dragon was selling. It didn't feel weird. It was more of a, what the hell, I'll buy one today because I could use some caffeine kind of feeling. I didn't even really think about it. It was a product I had purchased before, but not regularly. I was sipping on it when I walked into the meeting room where the computer science team was gathering that morning. The only one there before me was Benny. He had the same exact drink as me, placed in front of him on the table. "It looks like the ad worked," he guffawed as he gestured to the drink in my hand. I chuckled a bit before turning around to see Oscar entering the room. He was holding the same drink as us, half drunk in his hand. This only made Benny laugh harder. Oscar was confused until he saw our drinks, and then he cracked up a bit too. I wasn't chuckling anymore. Once Oscar and I had sat down and gotten settled into our chairs, Mike entered the room. He was not carrying a drink. I breathed a sigh. Was it of relief? I wasn't sure. Then he lugged his trademark backpack onto the meeting table, unzipped the side pocket, and withdrew his very own carbon copy of the drink. Benny absolutely lost it. He had almost rolled entirely out of his chair from laughing by the time Karen showed up. Thankfully, she was carrying a regular cup of coffee. But then again, she hadn't seen the ad the day before. "Are they giving out free samples again today?" she inquired as she looked from can to can on the conference table. No, we're all just die-hard fans, aren't we, gang?" Benny grinned. I wasn't sure how I felt. "We have 6 ads that we are showing the focus group today, right?" Karen asked, her notepad already at attention in her hands as she sat down to join us. "Yes, that's right. And I think that you'll agree that they have come a long way since the last batch. Do you want to cut it down to 5? Benny hit the button on the remote that turned on the projector with one hand while he sipped from his can with the other. "Potentially. Let's have a look at them first," she said as Benny obliged and queued up the videos. When the 6th and final video, the dragon video, was on deck, I excused myself to go to the bathroom. I stopped and stared at myself in the bathroom mirror. What had happened in that advertisement that was so effective? Or was it just a coincidence? It didn't seem to bother anyone else, so maybe I was overreacting. I spent a little while in there, too nervous about the dragon to return. I poured the rest of my drink down the bathroom sink. I don't know if they told Karen the story about how we had all seen the ad yesterday, but by the time I came back to the room, everyone was packing up. Karen smiled her brilliant smile at me and told me that she would see me at the focus group that afternoon. I nodded. A few hours later, I found myself in my seat per usual, watching the participants fill out their personal identification on their survey packets. I noticed that one of the participants was wearing an eye patch, but I think he was wearing it for medical reasons. I wondered whether not having depth perception would alter his enjoyment of the advertisements. I was brought out of my thoughts as one young woman raised her hand. "Is it a problem if I don't drink caffeine?" she half whispered to Karen. "There's no option on here for never use caffeine." "You never use caffeine? Really?" Karen was surprised, and so was I. The woman nodded. "I'm allergic to a bunch of weird stuff. Caffeine makes my tongue swell up and my skin all itchy," she patiently explained. "And my doctor tells me that if I have too much of it, my heart might stop." Karen shrugged. "Well, I mean, you're already here. You might as well tell us what you think of the ads. Is it safe for you to be near caffeine?" "Oh yes, I just can't have any." The young woman smiled, seemingly satisfied that she would be allowed to participate. I was meanwhile looking up caffeine allergies on my phone. Apparently they are exceedingly rare. It was my first time ever hearing of it. I would have to remember that for the next survey I designed, I thought to myself. The focus group proceeded as normal. They watched the first 5 ads with some level of interest, but most of it was due to the fact that they knew a machine had created the advertisements. The ads themselves were kind of average, even a bit annoying. They would have sudden noises or feature strangely colored cartoon characters. Like the kind of YouTube video that gets tens of millions of views for being so bizarre that you have to share it with your friends. Then the dragon ad came on. I honestly didn't want to stay and watch it, but I did. It got a few laughs, and more than a few breathing slightly harder out of the nose in amusements. The participant with the eye patch laughed so hard that he cried. Overall, the focus group liked it. "This is exactly the kind of thing I'd be impressed by," one participant said. The others chimed in with their agreement. I thought for a moment that maybe this machine learning stuff wasn't a waste of time after all. In the week following the focus group, I began gathering responses from the participants. The response rate was better than usual, with 15 out of 16 people responding to my emails. But the responses themselves were unusual. Every single person who responded had bought at least one drink, on their own, in the days following the focus group. 100%. On the day that I analyzed the 1-week follow-up emails, I found Oscar's office for the first time and knocked on the door. It was hidden in what was essentially the basement of the building, like the awkward computer-savvy people were being hidden away in favor of front-facing business and marketing personnel with their preferentially peppy attitudes. He opened the door quickly, as if he was expecting me. Saying nothing, he left the door open and then turned around and sat back at his desk in front of his computer monitors. "Can I come in?" I asked, just to make sure. He shrugged. "That's why I opened the door. I assume you want to talk about the dragon." As I stepped into his office, I was struck by how well organized and clean everything was. His papers were neatly stacked, his coffee mugs were arranged on hooks above his coffee maker, and every electrical cord I could see was cabled or velcroed into its proper place. The square magnets on his filing cabinet were at pristine 90-degree angles perpendicular to his walls, ceiling, and floor. The only thing that seemed out of place was his recycling bin, which was overflowing with empty, caffeinated drink cans. You know which kind. Apparently, I was checking out his office for long enough that he felt it necessary to repeat his question. "Are you here about the dragon? Because I'm hoping you're here about the dragon." He swiveled his desk chair around to look directly at me. Direct eye contact from him was so unusual that I quickly looked away. Well, yes, I suppose so," I replied, trying to figure out why he knew the reason that I was there. I hadn't shared the statistics with him yet, after all. "I can't get that damned thing out of my head." He swiveled his chair back towards his computer and brought up some software windows that I didn't recognize. "The dragon?" I asked, but he didn't answer. He began clicking his computer mouse, and the windows on his screen changed a bit. "Is that the neural network?" I asked, moving closer to see. "More or less. This is the branch that produced the dragon ad." He stabbed a stubby finger at some kind of diagram with circles and arrows. "Okay, so what's different about it?" I couldn't really understand what I was looking at. I'm not sure how much of it he understood either, if neural networks are as mysterious as I've been told. He seemed to think for a moment, and then said, "Nothing special." He scratched behind an ear and looked right at my eyes. I took that to mean that he was lying. "Come on, you can tell me," I said as I took a step closer. "What's some technical details between friends?" "I'm telling you, I have no idea what happened." "Oscar," I breathed. "What did you do?" He gave up the secret. "I fed it a bunch of fMRI datasets." "You mean the ones where people watched ads in an fMRI machine?" "Yes, but not just that. I gave it other fMRI studies too. Studies about the effects of music on the brain, and studies about the effects of caffeine on the brain." "Where did you get that data?" "Yeah, see, I might have acquired them through some back channels. Please, you can't tell anyone." "Well, now I guess I'm telling someone. Sorry, Oscar, had to be done." I returned to my office upstairs. Somehow, the neural network had used the information about blood flow in the brain and how it reacts to caffeine, music, and advertising to create a super effective advertisement, one that wouldn't leave people's heads. This whole situation with the dragon reminded me of a concept from psychology called the earworm. I spent the next few days digging into that and other research. Earworms are more officially known as involuntary musical imagery. And the best example of one is when you get a song stuck in your head that repeats itself all day long. Some are more annoying than others, but they can all be described as catchy. One thing that research reveals is that earworm songs generally have fast tempos. The lullaby from the advertisement didn't really seem to fit this pattern, but then again, the background music had been made up of many complex parts, so maybe something about it was catchy. Thus, it occurred to me that our nuisance wasn't a dragon at all. It was a worm. Every night we dreamt of the caffeine worm. As I dug into the research about caffeine and fMRI scanners, I began to notice the trend that the areas of the brain associated with caffeine usage are the same areas of the brain that help a person pay attention to things around them. More scientifically, the person's alerting systems in their frontal lobes react to both advertisements and caffeine. Could it be that somehow the advertisement-making neural network noticed this overlap and exploited it, forcing them to crave caffeine and pay attention to the dragon by using music to activate that region? I realize it sounds crazy, but it was the only theory I could come up with. It was a caffeine worm. But how had it latched onto everyone's memory? It was then that I stumbled across another type of research into neural networks. I discovered something that I had no idea was possible, called adversarial audio. Basically, it is a way of tricking a speech-to-text neural network into transcribing something that the human ear cannot detect. As an example, if I speak the words, "How many miles is it to the grocery store?" into my phone, the voice-to-text function would analyze what I said and bring up a map of the area. However, using adversarial audio, We could use a recorded audio track that sounds exactly like the phrase, "How many miles is it to the grocery store?" to the human ear, but end up with the phone hearing something else entirely. The phone could open up the calendar app and make a dentist's appointment. We could get the phone to hear anything we wanted it to, hidden inside of the original audio. But the human ear wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the two messages. As far as I could tell, this adversarial audio only worked on neural networks. But since neural networks are modeled after brains, could it be possible that the Caffeine Wyrm advertisement had hidden some kind of adversarial audio targeted at humans behind the music of the advertisement? Had it done so in such a way that it planted the caffeine worm deep in our brains? Had the neural networks found a flaw in the human brain that they could exploit to program us without us even knowing it? In the days that I took to ponder the problem, something happened that I didn't know about until later. Benny had gone ahead and run another iteration of the neural network, producing a new advertisement. As far as I know, nobody saw this one except for him. Saturday morning, just a few days after my discussion with Oscar, we got news that Benny had been arrested. Not only that, but we were surprised to learn that he had been stabbed during a fight with a man inside of a gas station. Apparently, the man who stabbed him was in police custody, and Benny wound up in the hospital. He didn't have any family in town, so I went to visit him. Outside of his room, there was a security guard on watch. Once the doctors had cleared his health, he would need to answer some more questions for the police about what had happened. "I don't understand it," Benny said as he laid back on his medical bed and let the painkillers flow freely through him. "Tell me what happened," I urged, more than a little curious. He told me the story a little out of order, probably from the pain and the meds, but I put together the pieces. He had entered a gas station, the same gas station that I stopped at most days between my home and work, and tried to buy himself one of the drinks that our worm was selling us. He had walked to the back of the store to the upright wall cooler where the caffeinated drinks were sold, all pretty in their rows of competing colors and brands. The problem was, the gas station was almost out of the drink he was craving. In fact, they only had one can left. Benny had reached into the cooler, grabbed the last can, and shut the cooler door. Just as he was about to walk to the register, someone else approached the cooler. It was a young man, who apparently wanted the same drink as Benny. He reached for it, and suddenly the two of them were in a struggle. "I don't know why I couldn't let go," mumbled Benny. They had struggled for a few moments, back and forth, tugging and craving. Because he had grabbed the can first, Benny had a better grip on it. Of course, that changed when the young man suddenly flashed a blade and sunk it into the soft flesh of Benny's stomach. He collapsed, and the young man calmly walked to the register to check out, where the cashier called the cops. "What did the guy look like?" I asked, pressing for details. He shook his head. "Just a young guy with dark hair. The only unusual thing about him was the eye patch." "Oh," I said. I had a terribly certain feeling that I had met that person before. I didn't go home after visiting Benny. Instead, I went back to my office. As I rode the elevator alone, the feeling of dread wouldn't leave the pit of my stomach. But I found myself humming a little tune. Something catchy. I slapped my hand across my mouth when I realized where the tune was from. I rode the rest of the way up in utter silence. I booted up my computer monitors and started going through the surveys from the day we showed that damn advertisement. It's extremely unethical for me to spend too much time looking at the responses without anonymizing them first, but that's exactly what I was there to do. I tore open the folder of responses from that focus group and began frantically comparing the intake surveys to the follow-up surveys in my email inbox. Somehow, I already knew what I would find. That woman, that allergic woman, she was the only one who had not responded to the email. It didn't take me long to find her obituary since I had her full name. The newspaper said she had died from anaphylactic shock or an allergic reaction to something. I knew right then that I had to shut down the program once and for all. I created some new summary reports. I manipulated the median responses and changed a few other key details, making the results look much worse than they actually were. I scheduled that meeting with Ed, my boss in my office, to discuss the future of the project. Could I have told him that somebody had died? Sure. Could I have told him that one of his own employees had gone so far down the advertisement hole that he had gotten stabbed for it? Perhaps. Should I have shared the 100% success rate? Maybe. But would you have? Would you let a company, any company, use a machine like that? I began to slowly choke the life out of the program. I instilled doubt in Ed that day and slowly pressed his buttons until he thought it was his idea to slay the damn thing. He never saw the worm ad, and we were careful to only show him the bad results. Karen was confused when the program was shut down. Hadn't the machines been doing well? She really had quite liked that one dragon ad. In fact, she told me she still thinks of it sometimes. Oscar and Mike burned it all. And I mean literally burned. The hard drives and the folders, they buried the pile as it smoldered. Something changed in Benny. Last I saw, he was still in the hospital, recovering from a secondary infection. Gone was the spunky old man with the howling laugh, and in his place was a quiet and fearful soul, humming a certain little lullaby as he sipped from those drink cans that he kept hidden from the nurses, lest they cut off his supply. We never saw the newest rendition of the ad that he had produced. It turned out to be for his brain only. And me? I've been doing okay. I haven't had any caffeine in almost 2 weeks now. The dreams haven't stopped yet, but each night they are a little less vivid, a little less long, and a little less tempting. The worm watches over me, shimmering in the air with its mysterious bone lace wings and orange copper scales, frowning and studying my face, wondering where it lost my loyalty.